Are we on? All right.
Hello.
Hey, hello, Twitch world. We have a first-person panel here. As you can see, Duffin's really into it. He's doing his first-person stuff.
Does that count as meta? That
It
we
is.
talk about first person?
Yeah, we were going to all wear GoPros at the same time and then upload that later, but too meta. So yeah, we have a animating first-person games panel here. We're going to jump into this, do some quick intros just so you know who we are, and then we'll go from there. So, all right, I'm doing this. So quick intros. We got...
Oh, me, yeah. So I'm James Benson. What have I done? I made Ori and the Blind Forest. I made Firewatch. I'm working on In the Valley of Gods. That's what I've done.
All right.
Oh, yeah, go on.
Who are you?
Hi, I'm Ryan Duffin. I'm animation lead at Dice LA. I work on nice. I work on Battlefield games. Worked on Spider-Man games as we showed last year. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm Esther. I'm an animator for Paladins at Hi-Res Studios, and before that I worked on Smite and NBA Live and Dungeon Defenders.
Awesome. And last but not least, I am Zach Lowry, and I'm a senior animator over at Boss Key, where I worked on Lawbreakers, and before that spent 10 years on the Saints Row franchise. So, all right. So when we wanted to do a panel at Animex to talk about first person, because it sometimes can be a mystery to people who don't do it, and sometimes it's a mystery to people who do it as well.
Were the turtle choices arbitrary?
Well,
Or
I
which
wanted
ones?
I wanted to be Michelangelo, but
I feel like you were maybe more of a Michael.
I didn't want to reorder the names at the bottom and all that. So yeah, whatever. So we wanted to talk about some cool stuff with first person animation. So we did a hashtag to get questions on Twitter about what people wanted to hear, what questions they had that they wanted us to answer. So we're just going to jump right into that. We don't have a ton of stuff to show, but we're just going to talk, and a lot of us can talk a lot. So I'm going to moderate and try and keep it going. I got a timer running right here. We're already 3 minutes in. So here we go. So the first question that was asked was, how do you handle creating matching or different content for your first person versus your third person animations? How important is this to your game to achieve total parity between the two, and why? Who wants to jump in on this first?
Ooh, I had a really good analogy I thought of for this, because it's kind of a stretch. But when I first learned to do makeup, then they were teaching me how to do my eyebrows, and they were saying how you want to make your brows like sisters but not twins, because when they're exactly the same, that's when it kind of looks a little eerie and it doesn't like sell. So it's not as flattering to your face. So for Paladins, just bear with me. So for Paladins.
This is exactly how I learned too.
Yeah, I thought so. That's what. Okay. For Paladins, we just try to do what works the best in terms of framing for the first-person camera and the third-person camera. For example, we had if there's a particular IO pose that looks really good in first person, but in Paladins you're also able to play in third person. Sometimes it blocks the silhouette, or you can't see where the gun is aiming or something. So we try our best to match it, but it's more important that we sell both the silhouettes to their camera, like eyebrows.
Makeup.
Yes. So, well, on Firewatch, we try to do shadows because it's all animated as if it's a third-person character that we just happen to be putting the camera in the head. But it was a very small team, and we cut shadows. So that's one way of doing it. You just don't have the shadows. But on Valley, because we've got an NPC around the whole time, we're trying quite hard to have them sort of share locomotion and stuff, and then mask out certain things that are not applicable. So some of the stuff that only works in first person, we just kind of don't apply that to the shadow and sort of split it up into layers and things. But also we try to do some corrective stuff with IK and things that you only apply to the shadow version and this kind of stuff. But it's quite it's sort of quite preliminary, and it's enormously difficult. We had this problem in the trailer, actually, a little bit. There's some shots, because we have full body shadows the whole time throughout the trailer. and then there was a very uncanny feeling where the little bounces and things that I'd sort of put in to make the first-person stuff sell, you could see it just like this exact mirror on the wall and things. So there, I did some stuff where I just reanimated it again and then put that in as a separate shadow model.
Brute force.
Yeah, which you can do for a trailer. But yes, that's sort of what I've been kind of trying to do.
Yeah. You got anything, Duffin?
Sure. I think it depends so much on the game. If it's like a single-player game like Firewatch or thanks. Like when you touch my hand. You can just hold it. For a game like Firewatch or Mirror's Edge or something like that, where there's like a character and body immersion and stuff is important, then yeah, I think that's kind of the way to do it. For a game like Battlefield, there's certain complexities that we add in first person that third person. The thing is, it's not the same as having a third person camera in a first person game. It's like you're looking at a different character, so it's sort of, our mentality towards it is that it's more representational. It's not you're seeing yourself. You're not looking at a mirror. The shadows are a third-person animation set rendered on a shadow-only mesh, and we've done that in first-person shooters for a long time. That's the cheapest way to do it. Even like Crysis was doing that back in the day, and you can see sometimes like an async between the first-person, third-person animation. Some of that's going to happen anyway because of network latency. But my big epiphany, and I've probably told this story too many times, but my big epiphany with first-person stuff is that I played many, many hours of Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2, and one of the thanks. Sorry. One of the first when I was working on a first-person game that wound up never shipping, I started actually digging into this game that I'd played a ton of hours on, and then I looked at the shotgun reload in third person, and it was playing an M4 animation. It was on Modern Warfare, so it's like. But I'd never noticed this in gameplay. The only thing that matters is that you see guys reloading, and if you're stopping and looking at the third-person characters in this kind of game, you're just going to get shot. So it's representational, and if you try to give it the same attention to detail as you do to the thing that's right up in your face, I think you can waste a lot of time. I think things like body awareness and shadows. Sometimes I think are interesting for game developers, but I don't know that they add that much.
Yeah, we're bleeding into the shadow question, which is actually up next. But on Lawbreakers, we did our animations had to be kind of the same length, because if one of them ended before first person ended before third person, it would just cut off the third person so that they would always stay synced up together. But a lot of times, like to me, it's not important that it's one-to-one, that like, oh, he's putting the clip in at the exact same time, because in first person, you want things to, magazine. You want things to be snappy, or, when you eject the magazine and then you reach for one off of your hip, in first person, you don't want to take the time to where it stays off screen that long, but in third person, you have to still sell that full mechanic and you can't snap it around. So to me, we just try to keep them, the same length and make sure that the beats kind of happen around the same timings. I'm going to jump into the next one, which is about shadows, and then we'll move on.
I think just one other thing to add to that is it's basically the goal for third person is to make it nothing should ever be happening in third person that looks like somebody in a game like Battlefield that somebody shouldn't be able to shoot you and they can. So obviously we favor the timing of first person. If somebody looks like they're reloading and they can shoot you, that's bad. But if it looks like they're not reloading and they do shoot you, or they don't shoot you, then it's not really a big deal.
Yep. Cool. So we hit shadows and kind of first and third matching up together. So now we're going to jump on to the next question, which is, what are some of your camera animation tips and tricks? Who wants to jump in on this one?
Why are you?
I'm just looking around.
Camera animation tips and tricks. Oh, God. Does anyone have a real tip or trick, or am I just going to bullshit?
You just kind of,
No one will know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I try and the way we do our first-person rigs, it's really treated like a regular character. I try not to really pull the camera like amazingly far away from the neck and stuff, because you can tell, you know what I mean? Like it lends the sense of this isn't really a person. So I actually try and base all of the camera and just the animation in general in like, this is just a third-person performance that I'm happening to show from a different thing. So most of the cheating happens in when something goes off screen, like if you've picked up an item and then it's going on your belt, then yeah, that you do that over like 3 frames and forget about it. But these days, certainly, I don't tend to like wrench the camera around, And other than that, just the sort of basic stuff of like, if you do rotational little bumps and things, then lots of people will throw up. So,
yeah.
I try and do just mostly translation-based things for like punching stuff up. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, we were talking a little bit before this, and one of the things that I really get annoyed by with cameras on first-person rigs is when they're set up to be like you would imagine, a normal body hierarchy would be, right? The camera is actually attached to the head, which we need to put it in that area, right? And we're faking it. But when you don't have ways of like space switching or changing the constraints on your camera, and then it's following the head bone, which is being affected by the spine and the root. So if you're trying to cheat things in first person and push that arm out there, and then you have to rotate your spine, well, now it's affected your camera and you have to counter animate this stuff. So I like to make sure that you keep that camera positioned where the head would be, but then you can animate it independently and set its space to whatever you need. I think that really helps out a lot. I'm just trying not to look. My head.
Thanks for including me.
Yeah.
So I'm relatively new to first-person animation, and the trick that I recently learned from my lead was just about having impacts. So, like for example, reloads where you have is magazine or clip the preferred term for
Magazine.
Ryan went on a rant earlier.
It just depends.
Okay.
My talk tomorrow at 9:30 on Wednesday will go into the difference.
Sorry for the spoilers. The magazine, when you're reloading and you're slamming into the gun, I had an animation like that. And I was confused in doing rotations, which James just pointed out. You don't want people to be hurling while they're playing your game. And I was kind of treating like literally when you hit the gun, the person's head or your camera would also slide to the side in that direction. But my lead showed me that actually having the contrast of moving the camera the opposite direction while your hands are going the opposite direction, it gives more of an impact for the same feeling.
Yep. Awesome.
I think the only thing that I would add is, you guys kind of covered it already, is that for games where aiming matters, then obviously you don't want to move the camera around too much, and I think that's probably like the biggest mistake that I see people make when they're new to first-person animation is like, oh, I'm just going to move the camera and it's going to look great, and it's like, and then you wind up, somebody's trying to aim against your animation, and that sucks. So thinking of it like punctuation, basically. We'll give it little knocks here and there, and generally only in situations where it's very clearly that the player isn't going to be able to hit something anyway, but it'll only be off for a couple of frames, not enough time that they're going to try and compensate for it.
And I think that also goes into like the basic tenets of game animation is you always need to be playing it in-game and seeing how it feels in-game, especially with these kind of aiming things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can do some interesting game design choices, too, to let people know that they can't aim during those times, right? Like, you want to move the camera around, you turn the reticle off, so then people don't expect to, like, be pointing at something directly in the center of the screen. So, cool. All right, we're good. We'll move on to the next one, see what Twitter has for us, which was, what are things you consider when rigging for first-person animations, and how does it compare to your third-person rig? Who wants to jump on this? I've got something I can pop off at.
I think like when you were talking about the head and camera and stuff like that, I think that just gets into like your rig should be as robust with space switching as possible. Like, I remember we had, I totally forgot this was a constraint at some point, but on Battlefield 3 we had an issue with like, it wasn't an issue, it was just like, oh, well, the gun is in the right hand. So there wasn't really a good way to space switch into the left hand. And then, for Battlefield 4 and on, we fixed that. And now it's like you can toss things back and forth between your hands. You can go animate with the gun, animate with the hand. And it's kind of the same for the camera. So it'll be local space, world space, look at constraint, things like that, which a lot of the stuff I never use, but it's all there.
Yeah, that was my big thing, too, was making sure that in first person, I talked a little bit about this at GDC last year in the tips and tricks stuff, was making sure that, like, in third person, I typically just constrain my gun to my hand, and then I just let the hand drive it, right? But when I go into first person, space switching to me is, like, one of the most important things, and frustrating things sometimes when you get really complex with it. But making sure that the gun itself is what you're animating. And I do all my timing and all my blocking to start with just on that gun. most of the time the hands aren't even on screen, and I get that feeling right. And then once I know what I want to do with it, I can just go in and start switching the hands around to do whatever I want, and grab magazines, pull slides, things like that. So to me, space switching is probably the biggest thing to make sure you have a very robust system in first person. And a way for your animators to add different spaces on the fly too, because you never know what the new thing is that's going to be asked for you, and you don't want it to be like, well, these are the only things that you can switch between. So.
Yeah, because on Valley and Firewatch, there's no gun, right? So actually, the vast majority of the time, all of the animations are just sort of empty-handed. So as far as the rigging stuff, a lot more attention than normal goes into like the way the fingers would deform and sort of making corrective shapes for the crunching down of the thing, and doing things so that you can properly. A lot of time in a rig, the bones will start at the knuckle, right? But making sure that you can really animate what the fuck is it called? The tendon? The metatarsals, yeah. Making sure that that's all in there, and with the way the wrist bends, and do you know what I mean? Like, so because the vast majority of the time, the animation I'm doing, are really like all of the life is in the finger, and like pushing against surfaces and that kind of stuff, rather than like, oh, I'm using like item 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 kind of thing. Yeah.
One other thing to add to that, I'm really glad that you mentioned the blend spaces, because not blend spaces, you know what I mean, blend shapes. Yeah, thank you. Corrective poses, I think that's one of the things that we are starting to see a lot in first-person rigs. Like you should expect to see this in the next few years. Is like there's some cool tech demos out there of, your hands are like, after the eyes, you can argue that the hands are actually more expressive than the mouth even, and we don't pay a ton of attention to it. Sometimes if it's just skin meshes and stuff like that, your hand is so much more emotive than that. So blend spaces, I think, is a really interesting potential. There was one thing that when you were talking about the spaces and weapons that made me think of one really interesting thing that we do is that our weapons are set up with, obviously this doesn't matter for your kind of game, but our weapons are set up that there's actually 2 parents that can be animated. Like there's a root, there's essentially 2 roots, and one is at where the pivot would be for third person, like on a rifle stock. And then there's another one that I place in the grip, and that's generally what I animate for first person, and for third person, I keep it at the shoulder.
Yeah, because the last thing you want in first person is animating your gun bobbing on the screen, but the pivot is way off the screen, right? It's a nightmare, and you sometimes you do it and you hate yourself the whole time, right? Awesome. So let's see.
I was going to say, that's one of the things, I don't know if it's related to the topic, but as far as like having things in your hand and where's it pivoting from, I always hate that feeling of like having something be grabbed by the character and then just the sense that it's like super glued to a position in their hand. So every time I'm doing like pickup animations or stuff, I try and have there be like 3 different points of contact that it ends up pivoting around. So they'll like grab it by the top and then toss it up, grab it in the middle, and then spin it around, and then it'll sort of settle. So that, because in the rest of say that you've just got the radio and Firewatch or whatever, right? Like
that's one of my favorite animations in Firewatch, by the way, is when you pick that radio up and he tosses it around. Great.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing like, even though the rest of the gameplay animation, it's kind of like just solidly stuck in one position, you set the tone with the pickup that like it's a real object that I can manipulate, even though you don't really show that for the next hour of using it, but it's sort of like helps the illusion a bit more that it isn't just like bang, bang, like constraint activated,
It's a really cool tip, too.
Anyway, there you go.
Yeah. All right. Twitter asked, when working on bigger games, are there guidelines you set for yourself so every animation feels it's fitting into the game and feels right? I don't know if this is specific to first person at all, but it's basically wants to know, how do we keep things consistent across all animations? Do you guys have guidelines or anything like that, or is it more of just
it's animation direction?
Feel, right? Yeah, it's the direction.
You have, it's feel and consistency. I mean, if you were working on something really stylized, then I think you can have your priorities. You can be like, oh, weight or whatever. We want things to be heavy and blah blah blah. But I mean, that's that's kind of just animation in general. So
Yeah, I don't know how much time we have to spend into this. Did you have something? You were raising your mic up.
Direction. I'm just
Yeah,
fiddling.
I mean, there's people on projects that this is their sole jobs and responsibilities on bigger projects themselves. I don't know when you're dealing with a much smaller scope.
We've got 2 animators at Campo. We had a new guy, Mike Juicefold, came on to last year help with the trailer and stuff, and he's brilliant. Just one thing that occurred to me is that I think a lot of the time with first-person stuff, it's pretty in vogue at the moment to, like, when you click on the lever, you see your character go and pull the thing. But a lot of the time, functionally, the information that you're getting is no different than if it was just a UI thing that clicked on. And I think that sort of not often enough in first-person animation is it considered all the sort of like interiority of the character that you would automatically assume that you were going to sort of work into your reference and the thinking before you start in a third-person performance. And yeah, like as far as like keeping it consistent, it's just sort of like really try and do all the same things that you would if it was like a cinematic, if it's first person, and not just like get to the thing and make it awesome, but sort of like, right, well, is the character feeling tentative about this? You know, a lot of the time, a first person like getting an item animations are sort of built to be like getting the Master Sword in Zelda, right? Like, I've acquired this thing and it's a wonderful thing. But like in Firewatch, there's a thing where you grab a set of keys, and the first time I animated it, I kind of did that, right? Where he like tossed it in the air, grabbed it, and sort of like did a little dance with his fingers. And our like writer, creator, director guy was like, remember, he's going to use these keys to go and like uncover a mystery that he's like sick with worry about. And, you know. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of the time we just need to apply the same level of thought that we would into a full body performance. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome because it segues into our next question, which is no, you segued perfectly into how do you compare animating specific name characters versus generic vessels. And this is something that, you know, I mentioned early, working on Saints Row franchise for 10 years, we struggled with for a very long time because you were, you know, it was Grand Theft Auto with your own customizable character, and that character was supposed to be an avatar of who you wanted to be. And they were never anyone. So the first 2 games, we spent all of our time like just being like, well, it's just generic dude, and you just do what generic dude would do, right? And it didn't really have a personality. And then on the 3rd one, we really sat down one day and we're like, we want to push it. We want to have a character to animate. So we started just talking to the writers, and in the animation room, we started also brainstorming like, who is this character? And then we just gave the generic guy a behavior, and we came up with this, what would Mike Lowry do? And no relation to myself, but Mike Lowry from Bad Boys, right? Will Smith's character. We were like, that is who this person is. And we went whole hog with that, and our animation quality improved, and you could just kind of ask that question when we needed something. It's like, well, in this, you know, cinematic direction, he's going to run, and what's going to happen when he gets to the edge of this thing? It's like, well, what would Mike Lowry do? He would jump before he even knows what's down there because he's confident and he knows no matter what it is, he's going to overcome that. So sometimes when you have those generic vessels, or in first person, if you're not doing a hero shooter and it's just like, you know, a bunch of different guns, how do you translate that from the generic gun into the personality of the gun, maybe?
I think like it kind of, for Paladins, all of ours are like, you know, heroes and champions. And one thing that we got out of Mike's talk last year, actually, and how he handles his character development for Agents, how he handled it for Agents of Mayhem, they have like a whole sheet that's like, you know, what are their drives, or like what music do they listen to, and that's something that we think of basically like, yeah, what would they do? Yeah. But it helps to lay it out, and that was a way that we could also, like the previous question, keep things consistent across characters. And like, to me, generic vessels is more about just functionality,
yeah,
versus motivation, drive, and influence and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of been lucky in that on Valley and on Firewatch, it's like the whole game is
personality.
Yeah, it's this narrative experience, right? So I kind of get that stuff for free. I think there's some games, like the Doom in 2016, I thought did a really good job of like taking something that could be almost like literally the most generic thing you could possibly imagine, right? Like a Space Marine, and actually made it incredibly specific. Especially in the first like 5 minutes of that game, they set the tone just unbelievably well, leaning into the sort of idea of like that character is like what the demons consider a demon, right?
Yeah.
And so that he bursts out of the sarcophagus, and then he's starting to get the exposition on the little computer monitor, and then he just fucking destroys it. And they did very clever things like when you first pick up the shotgun, they when he reloads it and the shell flies out, they time that right to the beat of when the metal music kicks in. So I don't think that having a character that's essentially a cipher necessarily means that it can't have any personality to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they did an awesome thing in that game. That's great that you brought it up, where everything that they did was like super over the top, like the most badass way that you could do this thing. And then you get those moments where he finds the little Doom doll and he like picks it up, and then he's like so just like passionate with it. And it's amazing. Like the juxtaposition was really cool. So yeah, you guys.
I think I'm the only one who animates empty vessels. I think part of it. I mean, there's like the empty vessel of like a first-person animation, like this is first-person stuff. So yeah, you're theoretically trying to project into it. But then there's the. I mean, we're making animations that could be thousands of different people. So we'll have sort of higher level direction about like in Battlefield 1 there's people weren't really that trained. They weren't like master badass soldiers and stuff like that. So on Battlefield 4, we've got like, this should be professional and efficient and stuff like that. In Battlefield 1, maybe a little more not expert, not pro, not showy and stuff like that. They're supposed to be soldiers. So there's also, when you have primaries and secondaries and stuff like that, if you get really stylized, then you can start introducing conflicting characters. If you get like, oh, I did this revolver thing that was so slick, and then you switch to a rifle that you're like scared to use, it's weird. So we have to keep it pretty. We have very broad direction guidelines like that. We don't want to put too much character into it, but that's really because it is different.
But you guys essentially have authenticity as your character, right? This is the way that an authentic person of that time, authentic-ish person of that time would behave, right?
Yeah, I'll get in trouble if I say authentic. We butt heads back and forth sometimes on that. But I think for me,
this is how a competently trained person may or may not work through.
Yeah, believability is the thing over realism and stuff like that. And I'll actually get into some of this in my talk tomorrow. But no, it's not for things that are interesting inherently to not capture what is interesting about them. That's when the authenticity matters, as long as it's not at the expense of gameplay. But like, we'll have things that are like, wow, this is a really stupid gun to reload, and that's why they never, it didn't continue for the next 100 years.
Yes.
And it's not efficient, and it's not. But we have to, we'll make it cool in some other ways. It's like, oh, this does a lot of damage, it takes 5 seconds to reload and stuff like that, and we'll make it work right because that's what separates it. That is the character, I think.
Awesome. All right, let's get into a little more philosophical question. If you could animate, or if you could do first-person animation set on something that wasn't a gun or a weapon, what would you want to try? Anything in the world.
I thought about this.
All right.
Ready for this one?
Hit it.
I would want to do a set that's like a zookeeper, where you're just walking around and interacting with animals. Like you have to reach your hand out, and the lemur will come under your hand, or like a bird will fly out, or you're like feeding them, or you're petting them, just something like that. I like animals.
Peaceful.
Yeah,
shoot
just a
them
really
at the end?
peaceful. Ryan,
It was a reference to David's talk.
Okay.
Hopefully people get it.
Tuss. Yeah.
That's
James, this is
I love it.
since the majority of the stuff that you do isn't weapons related.
Imagine if I could animate a game without a gun in it.
So let's flip the question for you, James. If you could animate the most
can animate
violent
anything.
thing possible, what would it be?
What's my favorite gun? Actually,
How many do you own?
the team that the team that made Ori, we prototyped a different game before Ori called War Soup, which was a sort of sci-fi War Soup. Yes.
SOUP.
Yeah, like the stuff that you eat, but it's sort of a liquid. That one.
I like this game already.
Yeah, and so and some of that stuff's online, and it was enormously fun. But it's nice to be a bit of an outlier. Yeah. The thing is, though, a lot of the things that are sort of satisfying about reload animations and that kind of stuff, and shooting and things, you can you can get that same feeling in objects that aren't, murder weapons. Like one of the things we kept referencing a bit on Valley with like loading the camera, because the way it's like an old film camera with these 2 cylinders containing the film reels, and then you kind of attach them to each other. And for the loading stuff, it's quite reminiscent of like the Demo Man's grenade launcher in TF2, and there's still those little latches and slamming things, doing this, that, and the other, or even simple things like on Firewatch. There's like a disposable film camera, and there's just little animations of like winding the film along, and it has that kind of like crunchy friction sort of feeling. So because of that, I don't really find myself sort of missing the like click button thing happens, because you can kind of get that with any generic object, really. Yeah.
Gun or sword? That's the question.
I really like this game, Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, that came out in like 2007 or something, and that had loads of really, really awesome first-person sword animations and stuff. So I'm going to go with that.
It is.
So, yeah, it's very good.
Swords coming to Valley soon. All right, what you got?
I got 2.
Oh,
One
you
of
only
them,
get one. Pick your best.
No, I'm going to give you 2.
All right.
I'm getting 2. One of them I'll never do because I think about it just because you go to work all day and you look at first-person stuff. So you start seeing things in that perspective. And so one of them I always thought would be fun is changing a roll of toilet paper. Somebody's already done that.
Yeah, I know. I was going to
it's
say.
pretty sweet.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, thank God. Now I don't have to.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go home and spend my time animating first-person stuff. Right. But then the other one, and I think the way you described it is totally right. Like reloading a gun is like a tactile thing, but it's just like the mechanical manipulation of it. It's the same as like turning a wrench and things like that. Like doing things with your hand is satisfying. So the thing that I think of, like I work on cars, and the thing that like when I'm reloading in my head is like changing batteries on my 20-volt power tools.
Yeah.
I'm like, and so I have a dream of like people from DeWalt, like power tools, like seeing my stuff and be like, hey man, we'll give you some tools if you do like first-person animations of like reloading our angle grinder. And I'd be like, yeah, I'm in.
All
So,
right.
DeWalt, if you're watching.
DeWalt 1617 says,
Hey.
No. That's awesome that you brought up the toilet paper one, because I remember seeing that. You guys can Google it out there, right? Like first-person toilet paper reload. And the guy like slaps the empty roll, slides a new one on there, spins it around. And I remember seeing that, and that kind of inspired me. And the answer that I have for this is I started looking around at everyday things and like thinking about the tactical way of using it. And the one that I would want to do is a Keurig machine. So like I had one at the house for so long, and then there was one at the office, and I just remember, and I've talked about this before to some of the people, and at some point now I think I need to do this just to do it. But I remember there's like that auditory noise of you pop the top, and you picture it like flipping out and ejecting like a cartridge, and then spinning around and slamming a new one in, clocking it down, and then just watching the coffee pour out and take a sip, throw it, somebody's face or something like that.
Basically, you guys both want to do like a really edgy, real life, like mundane, similar.
Totally
Yeah,
boring.
we're gonna start a
shit.
Tumblr account with nothing but these types of
Reloading
things.
normal. I've also thought about the Keurig. That's like a perfect example of like click, boom, like it's so well designed. Like it's fun to make.
It's not even the tactile stuff of like touching it, but it's the sounds that it makes when you hear the like
good.
pop. And I'll talk about sound a little bit too, but yeah.
I get upset when there's like an instant coffee maker that's not a Keurig because it's so much better than the other ones.
Nice.
Using a Zune after
Yes.
an iPad or something.
Yes. A Zune. Wow. All right. What's something that you think could shake up first-person animations or games?
I mean, I feel like this has been like a running theme of the week, but like less weapons, less killing.
I agree with that.
There's just more things that we can do, and also that I feel like a bit lame banging on about that because I'm like doing it. So it's like,
Wow.
be more like James.
Get on my level.
Yeah, no, but and also I would, if everyone did that, I'd be like, shit, I want to play the murder again. Can we do the murder again? But I do think that's broadly the way to get more sort of, a wider variety of possibilities.
Yeah. I think it'd be awesome to see more games try to do first person that you wouldn't expect. Like I remember back in the day, like 2K football had a first person football mode where you're like in the helmet and everybody could play like different positions and stuff like that. And I mean, at the time you just vomit everywhere because your head's shaking around. But just trying to do more things like that aren't just murder guns. So
Yeah, I like the
or
whole
zookeepers.
zookeepers. Yes,
I
very
really love
important.
that
That's
idea.
awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. I thought really hard about it. Yeah, I really, going with the whole theme of like games that aren't about fighting and killing and death. That's why I really like all the possibilities of VR, because it's like, imagine, first person Animal Crossing. Like, how amazing. You have a really stressful day and you go home and you just need to make friends and water your flowers.
Check your
And
mail and fish.
Yeah, check your mail, fish, like collect some bugs, and you feel like it's you. And I think that'd be really nice.
I'm down. Sounds cool.
Yeah.
Got something?
you go.
No?
I was going to say something, but you go first. Oh, yeah. Also, I feel like the default like protagonist in games in first-person games is so often like a human person, and it's as far as like locomotion and like varying up the way you get about a world stuff. I feel like we should be trying to do first-person games that have like you're a leopard or something. Do you know what I mean? Or just like flying games in first person. I mean, what reminds of Edith Finch did these little sort of
It's a great game.
vignettes with different character controllers, and that was sort of made me think like, God, why aren't there more sort of longer form experiences where we're just not a person with arms? We're doing so much of the same sort of thing over and over and over again.
Like I said earlier, 3-arm characters
3 arms,
really shake
yeah.
up first-person games. That's for sure.
That made me think of the old, I think it was Alien versus Predator 2, where there's the levels as you play as like a face hugger and all this stuff, and like there's so many cool experiences, like the few times that games have done something totally inhuman in first person, and it's great. I think one of the other things when we talk about mundane things like zookeeping and changing batteries and stuff like that, we talk about first person as like, oh, this is walking around and stuff like that, but there's a whole lot of first person games that are kind of normal things, like racing games are first-person games, piloting games, train simulators, all that stuff. And people, Euro truck simulators like a big deal. And it's like I'm gonna deliver a trailer full of loofahs,
Long haul
to Hamburg or whatever. And it's like that's cool. And you don't and then the terrorists attack.
Yeah.
No, it's just you're driving.
The game that comes to mind, the studio, The Outsiders, David Goldfarb and those guys, right? They're doing that first-person game. I can't think of the name of it.
It's like a Grendel.
Yeah, you're like a Grendel, and you're like crawling around on the ground and like just seeing interesting things be like test the waters. It doesn't just have to be the gun bobbing in the corner. Try something different and see. So, all right, we're gonna get into part 2, which is more questions. And we'll go a little bit faster on these. We have about 20 minutes left, and we got some tips and tricks and just questions for each other up here. So we'll hit these really fast. What kind of layers are used when moving and looking around in game? One person who wants to answer this. You guys do tons of layers.
We have lots of layers. I think what's different. Well, I don't know if it's different because I don't know how a lot of other people are using layers, but we'll have a bunch of stuff running, and there's generally a lot of inactive layers that only turn on for certain things, and that's sort of how we handle like some of the state machine problems you were talking about yesterday. In that you don't want states separated too much because then you have to worry about the bottleneck of the transition. But when you do layers of like, oh, we have an override layer of we want explosion reaction, and that needs to play over whatever else is happening, just put that on a layer over everything else, and then you don't have to worry about the state transition. So lots, but most of them are usually dormant.
All right, cool. Do you typically animate the entire character, oh god, this is long, and the camera position in the character's head, or with only the camera and arms with the camera position at chest height? We were talking a little bit about this earlier. Like, I think we all have the camera positioned at head height, right? And then bring the arms up into frame?
Yeah, for us personally, the camera is just like in between the eyes, like as close as it could possibly be to real. And yeah, we animate the entire body and just treat it completely like a third-person animation. We'll obviously skip things if it's like you're not going to see the legs at all. Like we won't really do anything with them, but we'll still kind of drag the IK targets around and just sort of like generally have it flow. We just won't polish those bits.
Yeah.
But it just helps well because a lot of the time what we're animating is like specific to a point in space, So it's like the posture of, well, I'm sort of kneeling under this table a little bit, and actually that forces me to do this with my ankle and things. It sort of informs whatever the camera's doing, even if you're not really seeing that what the hips are doing on screen.
Right.
It still could be like, oh, well, actually that sort of forces me into being like slightly rotating the camera over here to get the sense that I'm trying to get under something. And so yeah, I generally do the whole full body thing.
Awesome.
Go
ahead.
I can't tell if this question is also asking about like literally the rig and our animation scenes.
I think it's asking, do you put the camera where the head is and then bring the arms up to that height, or do you put the camera where the chest is and then the hands don't have to move, right? Like I think most games, I don't want to speak for all first-person games, but most people put the camera where the head is.
As an experiment, I bought, when I first got a GoPro to do first-person stuff, I tried it with like a head mount, and then I tried it with like a chest strap,
mount.
which that was the only time I've ever worn that thing. It's really like Fifth Element looking. It's weird. It's useless. It's like you need to be up and above.
Yeah.
It made some interesting videos, but it's...
All right, another quick question. Can you use motion capture for first-person animations? If so, how would you? I think the answer is yes, you could.
You could.
I think you might end up fighting it more than, actually just taking the time to key what you want, right?
I think it's less of a question of can you. Of course you can. It's just is it actually saving you the time? Is it the tool that mocap is supposed to be, or is it we'll have things like, oh, we could scan a maquette of something, or we can like recreate it in ZBrush, and it's like, oh well, yeah, you can scan it and that's like the source, but are you going to spend more time cleaning that up, topoing it, right?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what Esther was thinking.
yeah. So yeah, you could. I can see. We've done it in like our melee interactions and stuff like that for complex interactions in a realistic game. I can see the merit of it, but for most stuff, it's just we can knock it out.
It always
real
is that
fast.
thing that ends up being like, hey, let's do this, and then you do it as an experiment, and you quickly go, yeah, this isn't saving time, and it's actually burning money.
Yeah, I would say, and we were talking about this. I was talking about this with somebody the last couple of days, but there are things like the leap motion controller. I've looked into doing that kind of stuff for getting like finger subtleties real fast, and potentially like the perception neuron system. That's like it's not quite there, but there's ways of I could see it being interesting for fingers,
Right.
potentially. If there's like a quick desktop way for an animator to do that, kind of like what you're showing with the face stuff. Yeah. If you could do that for hands, then that might be worth it. But getting an actor in a suit, I think, is overkill.
Yeah. I think it also depends on what you're animating too, right? Like you guys might be able to benefit from it because maybe you have access to this actual weapon that is correct and it's made to scale, but like some games where it's a sci-fi gun, right? And you need to do all this complex stuff, like it's just easier to hand key that than, and 90% of the time in games you get something and it's like, oh, this prop artist made this prop and it's the wrong scale. And, you have to change it or do all this stuff. And I could see it potentially for games where you're not interacting with like a two-handed type thing, but it's like, oh, I just want to do mocap of picking up my hand and flipping this around. But to me, there needs to be a certain amount of snap to first person because people perceive things to actually happen faster than they actually do, right?
I think there's also this is obviously weapon specific because this is what I work on, but there's you can get a mocap actor who's not good with a weapon and looks like a total amateur.
Yes.
And then you can get a professional in the suit, and then it's like, well, professionals don't actually use stuff the way that we use them in video games. You're not like running at somebody while you're reloading your gun and things like that. So getting the right performance is a lot harder than you think.
Yep. All right, we got some quick tips and tricks. We'll hit these real quick. So the one that I wanted to share is audio is your friend. Think about how your animations will sound to help inform you how your animation should feel. Now I'm speaking purely from animating a bunch of guns that didn't exist, right? But to me, I had this epiphany one day where I was trying to figure out how to reload this gun, and as we probably all do, we walk around like doing stuff or like mimicking what we want our performance to be. And I was in the kitchen at work, and they had like a whole bunch of Skittles bags. And I grabbed this bag of Skittles, and it made this sound, and then I started like flipping it around and like swinging it back and forth. And then I figured out, I was like, okay, well, they're going to eject the magazine like this. and then they're going to snap a new one in and then pop the slide. And I just kept doing this tone back and forth until it sounded right to me. Because what I learned is, especially we were making a very competitive game, people will see your animation 3-4 times, and then at some point they just quit looking at it. And all they're doing is staring at the center of the screen to see who's coming. So they're listening for these keys to know when they're finished, because they don't want to take their eyes off and be like, did he pull the slide? Like, what's going on? So to me, when I start approaching things, I think about how it's going to sound, and I find those key beats from that. So then I go, okay, well, those 3 things that are happening are what I really want to make sure I hold the pose, or I put all my action on that. And then the bigger, more powerful the gun is, I have more beats and things like that. And it's awesome because I go to the audio guys and I can say like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, and they can almost start on it before my animation's even done because they know what I'm trying to hit. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like not just first person, but every animation I do, most of the time I'm out loud, just watching it loop over and over, doing like sound effects with my mouth.
Yes.
Yeah.
We wanted to do a GDC talk, me and our lead gameplay programmer, called Mouth Noises, the unofficial language of video game development, because we would always start talking and it would be like, hey, what do you want this thing to do? And he's like, I don't know. You put it down and it's like, and then I'm like, oh, all right, I got you. It's gas canister. You pull this thing. Like, so it's really
Did people notice in Richard's talk yesterday he did that, and all the animators like, oh, yeah.
All right. Esther, she says...
Esther says, first off, shout out to Zach for like scrounging through the interwebs and finding our horrible pictures and then cutting them out.
Yeah, nice job.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Thank you for doing
What's
that.
Facebook's for?
My million-year-old picture. Mine's just pretty straightforward. Do the animation, get that feeling right before you go nuts with the camera. I mean, it's like, you want to get your root motion feeling good before you start animating all your tassels and hair. And I was making the mistake when I first started of like trying to handle it all at once. But then, I'd be unintentionally counter-animating things in view to the camera because I was moving the camera while moving the arms and stuff. So, just straightforward tip 101.
That's a good tip. Duffin says, hotkeys are the best. Something about hotkeys, blah, blah, blah. I just added this 2 seconds before we started.
Is that in my voice that I just added this? Or
That's me making fun of you, writing in second person for you. I think that's right. Second, maybe.
You is second person. You wrote this. Anyway,
Whatever. Just hotkeys.
Esther and I went back and forth on this because I don't want to be like the guy who just repeats himself all the time. Nobody likes that guy, but like I see so many animators who don't use hotkeys and don't use shortcuts and stuff like that, and it's really like you're going slower. That you're doing like 25 in the fast lane. Like, why? There's no reason for you to do that other than your life output is shorter because you're not doing things the smart way. Reference was the other thing.
Yes.
I gave a micro talk in 2016 about reference and caring about things as much as the experts do, and not concluding that because you're the one making it that you're the expert, that like, oh, no one will notice this, and that's like a big pet peeve of mine too.
And when you can't reference, get that bag of Skittles.
Get the bag of Skittles.
Awesome. And then James has no tips. So we're going to, unless you have something real quick.
Tips. This is really very general, but I do, and I sort of said this earlier, but making first-person stuff, just ask yourself why a lot more. Why is the character doing this? What's going on in the character's head? What's the last 2 hours of their life been like? Even if you're cutting into a period of time where, like, oh, they're doing a thing, just try and actually think about, like, what's the motivation? I mean, I know it's a bit like wishy-washy, but it's
awesome.
Actually it's incredibly important. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So we have 10 minutes left, and we have some questions for each other as we were putting this deck together to talk about some stuff. I know I personally had questions that I wanted to ping off of you guys, and so we're going to hit these really quick as well, and then maybe we'll have some time for the Twitch chat. If not, we'll have links to our Twitter handles. Hit us up anytime. So.
Wait, sorry, real quick. Do we have Twitch questions pending? Is that something we should be trying to make room for? Or?
Maybe. No one's responding. Allie's making paper airplane.
Ooh.
Do you have Twitch questions?
I'm scared.
Oh. All right. Well, then maybe we'll hit these real quick.
Oh, it's quite a lot.
Both sides. Wow.
Hey, nice.
All right.
Damn.
Well, then we will ignore my questions.
I didn't mean to.
All right.
Hijack.
Sizzle182 says, do animations on FP games also take care of... Do animators also take care of animating the cameras?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Those two things, yeah.
they do.
Yeah, they're connected. All right. Sweet Red Hoodie says, how do you animate melee attacks to feel visceral, especially when it comes to animating the camera? And how does animating melee differ from gun animations?
I think the best way to make things visceral is to just make it and wait for an art director to tell you to make it visceral.
That's true. What I know I have learned about melee is in first person it's very difficult to make it feel right. But what I like to do is whip things past the screen really fast and then hold them on the other side. So if you have like a knife slash, you're not seeing it go like 6 frames across. It's like 1 over here, 2 over here, and then it's just holding there for a couple more frames because you're creating the illusion of what happened, and then most of the time you're gonna have VFX of like trails or blood or whatever pop on the screen. So and then shake the camera.
We do it by like locking people into combos and stuff like that. But if you don't do that, it's pretty difficult to make a swing look like it maybe connected and maybe didn't. Sorry.
All right. Chopsoki says, does anyone ever do third and first person animations purely with layers? And I think you can check out the talks that they did on Overwatch's process last year, which they were doing tons of layer based things, right? I can't answer.
Authoring multiple layers inside Maya, then exporting those all
Yeah.
separately into the engine.
It was mind blowing.
They did just Overwatch is quite good actually, isn't it?
They've done a job that was well done. Travdar, sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong. Travdar says, does reference come into play when animating FP something I can't read? If so, elements. If so, how do you go about grabbing these references for first person animations? Do you ever look at other things for inspirations?
One thing I would say about that is, right, I find that reference is very good for working out the functional body mechanics of what has to happen, but sometimes it's easy to overestimate your abilities as an actor. I remember actually when the first job I had, I was on Fable 3, and me and my superior animator guy, my supervisor, went to shoot some reference, and after we'd done it, he was like, you're just overacting so much. Like, I'm going to animate that into the thing. You don't need to, do squash and stretch somehow on your own body. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, I do use reference, but mostly just, which fingers can be curled at the same time as other ones. Things like that are just, that's pretty much a hard rule of a human body, but not, don't worry about your timing and how snappy it's going to be or anything like that. Yeah.
Here's a really cool question. Chopsoki again says, got any good first-person verbs for design/style besides visceral and physical? What are verbs Yeah.
I like to say crunchy. I like things to have some crunch, so that's my verb.
I like jiggle.
Oh, jiggle and wiggle, actually.
Jiggle and jangle, right? It's like I want a gun and it's got to have some pieces on it that jangle a little bit. You need that secondary motion.
What about juice? Something that's juicy. It's more like a feel.
It sounds like
Sorry,
a
Julie.
millennial ad agency here.
Juicy. All right. What
Maybe, I
animation
don't know.
have you animated that you would describe as juicy?
Don't put me on the spot, Zach.
Anything?
Yeah, heavy. I mean, I think
Heavy.
weight. I mean, we all know that we are supposed to capture weight as animators, but
Sure, heavy's a verb.
Yeah, I'm confused because I feel like we're using adjectives and
That's true. Doesn't matter.
You know
What they meant to
grammar
say
real
was
well.
adjective is what they
Yeah.
meant. Yes, I read it wrong.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
That's what we should.
thank you for the questions.
Is it more?
Oh, there's more. Oh God.
Oh, nice plain, Mike.
Mike Joneblue 24/7
James.
says,
Mike.
"Can you teach me how to throw?"
We can still try and get to the other ones if we got time.
All right. This says, is it important to include one or more first-person animations on your reel when applying for companies with FP games? From Resistance Fox. I think this goes into demo reel 101, right? If you're, as they mentioned earlier, I think Jaleel said it, if you're applying it somewhere specific and you know what they make and you know what you're going to do, I would heavily suggest like tailoring something towards that. It may save you from being asked to like, hey, do a test for us, right? Because you've got all this awesome third-person stuff and you've never done a first-person thing, so now do this. So, I don't know.
I would say generally, like a bad position to be in when someone's watching your reel is that they're assessing your potential, right? It's much stronger position to be in that they see the thing and they go, I wish that was in the game that we're making.
Yes.
Because essentially, even if your potential is enormous and blinding, it's still essentially unknowable. Mm-hmm. So the more specific you can be to, like, is this thing that's in my reel, would I be happy if that was in a game that I'd paid $60 for? You know what I mean? And assessing it via that metric rather than, am I proud of this animation? Or something that's a bit more sort of subjective like that. So, yes.
You could like break it into show, don't tell, like in what you want, or like tailoring your portfolio to the job that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. All right.
I would say it wouldn't disqualify you to not have it, but it's absolutely an advantage.
I mean, good animation on a reel, people are going to recognize that, right? And the question may be, hey, we make first-person games. Do you want to do that? Because you've got all this other awesome stuff, right? And I think Matt Boehm and I, and we've all talked about this stuff of like, just because we really enjoy doing first-person stuff, it doesn't mean that we can only animate in first person, right? So I think it goes both ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, that was all of the Twitch questions, so we're going to try and bang through these quick panel questions in 4 minutes. So I asked, hey, Duffin,
yes,
on Battlefield, you guys have a variety of weapon fires and the way that the gun recoils. Is that procedural? Are you guys brute forcing that? 1 minute, go.
There are several animations of different intensities that happen at a consistent speed, a consistent rate of fire, essentially, that we expose to designers, so they basically blend between those. So if it's like a little submachine gun, we might have it, and if it's a big heavy machine gun, it might go bop, 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 bop. And they blend that, and then they speed scale it based on the rate of fire of the weapon.
There you go.
That's it.
That stuff looks cool. Really good job.
I didn't do it.
All right. Duffin says, hey, James, seeing your inventory. In combat-heavy games, seeing your weapon is super important. It's showing your active inventory, etc. How does this differ on games like Firewatch?
Yeah, I mean, your active inventory on a game like Firewatch is just what you're capable of doing as a human being. And that sort of goes both ways, right? In that if the answer is not very much, then that sort of feeds into the character of the animation. So on Firewatch, the way that ends up manifesting is that Henry isn't very good at climbing over things, but he has to do it quite a bit. So, yeah. And then, I mean, we do have some stuff in Firewatch that's sort of like snappy, press shift to pull up your radio, but by and large, it just makes you think about you're animating a character rather than a series of items, you know?
Cool.
So that's the sort of thing, yeah.
Sounds awesome. Esther asked,
Hey, Zach, you worked on a lot of unique weapons in the world of Lawbreakers. Can you talk about your creative process when approaching open-ended animations like reloads and weapon inspects?
Yeah, so again, the luxury of working on weapons that aren't real, you can kind of do a lot of creative things with them. And we have a ton of weapons that we were able to just kind of do whatever we want. But what I developed for myself outside of, the Skittle audio trick that I was using was this is going to sound super douchey, but I try to think of like style and how that applies to things. One of my favorite gameplay animations of all time is super simple. It was on Gears of War. The guys, when they would go to pick up I think it was the huge sniper rifle, right? Instead of just bending down and grabbing it off the ground and equipping it, they would hook their foot under it and they would pop it up like a skateboard and catch it. And it's super simple. It's, I don't know, probably 15 frames max, but it was like super awesome. So I try to think of things like that. Like I've got this cool, sci-fi grenade launcher. How do I want to reload this? Well, what's the coolest way to do this? Like I could grab this and, do it, but I'm not doing something that has to be authentic, so I can do whatever I want. So I start thinking about, well, I want these latches to pop open, so this person's going to punch this thing, and then they're going to slap it in there. And I think the more crunchy it is, to me, is like when an environment artist creates an environment, and they go in, and then they just grind map the hell out of it and make it dirty. Like, the dirtier it is, the better it is. So I really like to, that sounded bad, but I really just like to think about, punching things and making that gun, like, pay for what it's doing, right? It's killing people, now it's going to pay for it when you reload it, so. And then I said, hey, Esther, when you were first thrown into first-person animation, what was the most mind-blowing, difficult hurdle for you to wrap your head around? You've got a few seconds.
Oh, God. All right, I have a few seconds. So I think it's just the fact that there seems to be so much less you're supposed to be animating, but everything feels like it impacts everything so much more. So the difference between one frame, like moving your pose in one frame, or like the slightly adjusting the pose of the fingers, or the camera's turning to the little bit. That was something that really is a huge hurdle, and I'm still struggling with, and it's awesome at the same time.
Struggle is real.
Struggle is real.
All right, well, that's our time for today. I want to thank everybody watching, asking questions, and everybody here on the panel with me. Please be our friends right there. You can see our Twitter handles. Hit us up. I think we're all open for people to slide up in the DMs and ask us questions if you want to learn more about first-person stuff. So,
Thanks, everyone.
all right, that's what that means, right?
Thank you.